They thought the moment she stayed silent was the moment she lost everything. The ballroom shimmered under cascading crystal chandeliers, each one reflecting off polished marble floors that stretched across nearly 5,000 square feet of curated luxury. The kind of space where every guest wore confidence like a tailored suit, and every smile carried calculation beneath it. And yet when Vanessa Cole stepped through the entrance, there was something about her that didn't match the room, not because she lacked elegance, but because she didn't try to prove it. Dressed in a sleek black gown that was understated compared to the glittering designer labels surrounding her, her presence drew eyes not with extravagance, but with quiet gravity, the kind people didn't understand so they dismissed it, whispers trailing behind her as she moved past clusters of social elites who had already decided who mattered and who didn't. And then came Sophie Langford, radiant in a sharp, attention-demanding red dress, her smile cutting through the room like she owned it, her arm looped possessively around Daniel Whitmore, who didn't even try to hide the satisfaction in his expression as his gaze landed on Vanessa. A flicker of recognition quickly replaced by cold indifference, as if 5 years of marriage could be erased by a single decision. And the air shifted, subtle but undeniable, as Sophie stepped forward, heels echoing across the marble like a countdown no one else seemed to hear. Stopping just inches away from Vanessa, her eyes scanning her from head to toe. With open disdain, the surrounding conversations fading into a tense silence as attention gathered, waiting, anticipating, and then it happened, quick and sharp, a sudden motion that sent a ripple through the crowd, a collective intake of breath as Vanessa's head turned slightly from the impact. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just enough to confirm what everyone had witnessed, and for a moment, time froze. Cameras in the distance pausing mid-flash, champagne glasses hovering halfway to lips, and all eyes locked onto her, expecting something, anything, a reaction, a breakdown, a scene, but Vanessa didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even raise her hand, her fingers resting calmly at her side as she slowly turned her face back forward, her expression composed in a way that unsettled more than any outburst could have, because it wasn't weakness, it was restraint. And no one in that room knew what to do with that, especially not Sophie, whose confident smirk faltered just slightly before she doubled down, her voice cutting through the silence with deliberate cruelty, making sure every person within earshot could hear, turning the moment into a performance, while Daniel stood there, unmoving, his silence louder than any words he could have said, confirming to the room exactly where he stood. And still, Vanessa said nothing, her eyes sweeping the space once, not searching for support, not asking for sympathy, but observing, calculating, as if she were seeing something no one else could. And that was the moment everything began to shift, though no one realized it yet, because what they saw was a woman, standing alone, humiliated in a room designed to celebrate power. But what they didn't see was that the room itself was about to answer to her. The silence did not break, it thickened, spreading through the ballroom like something alive as every pair of eyes locked onto Vanessa Cole, waiting for the reaction they believed they had already earned. Because in rooms like this, silence was never respected, it was interpreted as surrender, and one by one the whispers began to rise again, low at first, then louder, sharper, turning into quiet judgments that traveled faster than any announcement. "Did you see that?" someone murmured near the bar. She did not even fight back. Another voice added, almost amused, as if the moment had become entertainment rather than something real. And Sophie Langford stood at the center of it all, her confidence swelling as the crowd subtly shifted in her favor, feeding off the attention, her chin lifting slightly as though she had just established her place in the hierarchy without needing to say another word. But she did anyway, because control in her world was never enough unless it was heard. "You really should have stayed home," she said, her voice smooth, but edged with dismissal, making sure it carried across the nearest circles of guests, while Daniel Whitmore exhaled quietly beside her, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just existing in that space of calculated indifference, the kind that told everyone exactly what side he had chosen without ever needing to defend it. And that hurt more than anything else could have, not because Vanessa expected protection, but because his silence confirmed something deeper, something colder. That too. Him she was already erased, replaced, rewritten into a past that no longer deserved acknowledgement. And yet Vanessa did not flinch, did not react the way they wanted her to, her posture steady, her gaze level, as if the moment unfolding around her was something she had already measured and accepted long before she walked into that room. And that was what unsettled people, not the humiliation itself, but the absence of collapse, because they did not know how to process someone who refused to perform weakness on cue. And so the crowd compensated by leaning further into their assumptions, their confidence growing as hers remained quiet. Someone near the entrance chuckled under their breath. Another guest shook their head slightly, whispering that security should handle it before it became awkward. And that word, awkward, spread quickly, transforming the situation from spectacle to inconvenience. The kind that powerful people expected to be removed without effort, and Sophie sensed that shift immediately, her eyes flicking toward one of the staff members standing near the edge of the room, a subtle nod passing between them as she took another step forward, closing what little space remained between her and Vanessa, her tone sharpening now, less performative and more commanding. "This is not your place anymore," she said, quieter this time, but somehow louder in its intent, because it was no longer about the crowd. It was about ownership, about drawing a line and expecting it to be enforced. And for a brief second, something changed in the air, not visible, not obvious, but real, as a few of the staff exchanged glances that did not quite match the script unfolding in front of them, a hesitation so small it could have been missed entirely, except Vanessa noticed it, her eyes shifting just slightly, catching the detail, filing it away without reacting. And that was when the balance began to tilt, not enough for anyone else to see, not yet, but enough to matter, because while everyone else believed the moment had already reached its conclusion, Vanessa knew it had only just begun. Vanessa did not move, not because she could not, but because she understood something the rest of the room did not, that every second of silence was stretching the moment further, turning what they thought was a finished scene into something unfinished and dangerous. And while the crowd leaned in, expecting a reaction that never came, her mind was already 3 steps ahead, observing not just the people but the patterns. The way a server paused too long near the champagne table, the way a man in a dark suit near the back subtly adjusted his earpiece, the way the music, soft and elegant just moments ago, now felt slightly off, as if even the rhythm of the room was hesitating. And Sophie, sensing that the attention was beginning to drift from her control, tightened her stance, her smile sharpening into something less polished and more forced, because power in her world depended on constant reinforcement, and silence threatened that more than defiance ever could. "Are you deaf or just pretending?" she said, her voice rising just enough to pull the attention back, her words no longer smooth but edged with impatience. While Daniel shifted slightly beside her, crossing his arms, his expression unreadable but distant, as if he had already detached himself from the consequences of what was happening, leaving Sophie to carry the moment forward alone. And that was when Vanessa finally moved, not dramatically, not in a way that satisfied the tension, but in a small, deliberate motion as she lifted her hand to smooth the fabric at her shoulder, as if adjusting her dress mattered more than the confrontation itself. And that simple act disrupted the narrative the crowd had already built, because it did not match the role they had assigned her, and confusion flickered through the room, subtle but real, as people exchanged glances that said the same thing without words. Something about this was not unfolding the way it should, and Vanessa's eyes lifted again, not toward Sophie this time, but past her, toward the far end of the ballroom, where the staff in trance remained partially visible behind a set of tall mirrored panels. And for just a fraction of a second, her gaze lingered there, focused, intentional, before returning to the present, and no one understood why. Not yet, because they were still trapped in the surface of the moment, still reacting instead of seeing, while beneath it all something else was aligning, something quieter but far more decisive. And Sophie mistook that quiet for submission, stepping closer again, closing the distance with a confidence that bordered on recklessness, her voice lowering now, meant only for Vanessa but loud enough for those nearest to hear. "You are embarrassing yourself," she said, each word slow and deliberate, as if she were delivering a final warning. "Leave before someone makes you." And that was the line she believed would end it. the point where Vanessa would finally break or retreat, because in Sophie's world there were only two outcomes, dominance or defeat. But Vanessa did not respond the way she expected, did not retreat, did not argue, did not plead. Instead, she inhaled slowly, steady and controlled, as if grounding herself in something deeper than the moment. And then, for the first time since the entire scene began, she spoke, her voice calm, measured, and almost too quiet for the tension it carried. "Are you sure you want that?" she said, and the words did not sound like a question. They sounded like a warning, and the room felt it instantly, a subtle shift that rippled outward, because something in her tone did not belong to someone who had lost. It belonged to someone who was waiting. And somewhere behind the scenes, unseen by most, a decision had just been made. The words lingered in the air longer than they should have, not because they were loud, but because they did not belong to the version of Vanessa everyone thought they understood, and that subtle mismatch began to unravel the certainty Sophie had been standing on, even if she refused to acknowledge it, her expression tightening for just a fraction of a second before she let out a short, dismissive laugh, the kind meant to erase doubt before it could spread. "You are in no position to make warnings," she replied, her tone sharper now, less composed, because something about Vanessa's calm had disrupted the rhythm she was trying to control, and the crowd felt it too, though none of them could explain why. A quiet unease slipping beneath their earlier confidence, as if the scene had taken a turn they had not anticipated but could not yet define, and Daniel shifted again, his jaw tightening slightly as his eyes flicked between the two women, not stepping in, not stopping it, but no longer entirely comfortable in his silence, because even he could sense that something was off, something just outside his understanding. And yet pride kept him still, kept him aligned with the version of events he had already committed to, while Sophie, determined to reclaim the narrative completely, raised her hand slightly, signaling toward one of the security staff positioned along the wall, her gesture small but authoritative, the kind that expected immediate compliance. "Escort her out," she said, her voice clear and firm, carrying just enough volume to reach beyond the immediate circle, turning the moment into a directive rather than a confrontation, and for a second, everything seemed to fall back into place. The natural order of power reasserting itself as a uniformed guard began to step forward, his posture professional, his expression neutral, and the crowd relaxed into that expectation, the tension easing as they prepared to watch the final act unfold, convinced once again that they understood how this story would end. But then something unexpected happened, not dramatic, not loud, just a pause, a hesitation so slight it could have been dismissed as nothing, except it did not pass. The guard slowing as he approached, his eyes shifting briefly away from Vanessa and toward the far side of the room, as if receiving something unseen, unheard by everyone else, and that hesitation spread, almost imperceptibly, to another staff member nearby, and then another, a quiet ripple moving through the edges of the room while the center remained frozen in anticipation, and Sophie noticed it, her confidence flickering again as she repeated the command, this time more firmly. "Now," she added, her voice tightening, because control that needed to be repeated was already slipping, and Vanessa stood there, unmoving, her gaze steady, not on Sophie, not on Daniel, but on the guard who had stopped just short of reaching her, her expression unchanged, her composure intact, as if she had been expecting this exact moment, as if the hesitation was not a surprise but a confirmation. And that was when the atmosphere shifted again, more noticeably this time. The kind of shift that made people straighten slightly, that made conversation stop entirely, that made the room feel suddenly smaller despite its size, because beneath the surface, something had just overridden the command that had been given, and no one yet knew who had done it. But everyone could feel that the authority in the room was no longer where they thought it was. The pause did not resolve, it expanded, stretching across the ballroom in a way that no one could ignore anymore, because what should have been a simple command followed by immediate action had turned into something uncertain, something delayed, and in a room built on control and precision, hesitation was never random. It meant something had interrupted the chain of authority, and Vanessa could feel the shift settle into place like a final piece clicking into alignment, her posture remaining relaxed, her expression unchanged, but her awareness sharpening. while Sophie's confidence began to fracture in subtle, almost invisible ways, her eyes flicking between the guard who had stopped and the others along the perimeter, searching for the response she expected and not finding it. "What are you waiting for?" she said, her voice tightening, no longer smooth, no longer effortless. Because power that had to be questioned was already slipping away, and the guard in front of Vanessa hesitated again, his stance still professional, but no longer certain, his attention divided as his hand moved slightly toward the communication device at his side, pressing it briefly as if confirming something, listening, and then pausing again, and that small action did more to disrupt the room than anything else so far, because it introduced something the guests had not considered, that the decision was no longer being made here, not by Sophie, not by Daniel, but somewhere else, somewhere unseen, and the ripple spread quickly, whispers shifting in tone from amused to confused, from confident to uncertain, as people began to notice details they had ignored before, the staff who were no longer moving as quickly, the subtle glances exchanged between security personnel, the way the man near the back with the earpiece had now stepped slightly forward, his presence more defined, more intentional, and Daniel noticed it too, his posture straightening, his brows pulling together as he followed the direction of the guard's attention, trying to understand what had changed, because from his perspective nothing should have. The situation was clear, simple, resolved, and yet it was not resolving. It was stalling, and that lack of control unsettled him more than he wanted to admit, while Sophie, refusing to accept the shift, took another step forward, her voice sharper now, cutting through the room with urgency rather than authority. "Remove her," she repeated. But this time the words did not land the same way, they did not carry the same weight, because the room itself was no longer fully behind her, and Vanessa, standing at the center of it all, finally allowed the smallest change in her expression, not a smile, not satisfaction, but recognition, as if something she had anticipated was now unfolding exactly on schedule, her gaze lifting once more, not toward the crowd, not toward Sophie, but toward the far end of the ballroom where a set of double doors, previously unnoticed by most, had just opened slightly, enough for a figure to step through, composed, deliberate, and immediately acknowledged by the security staff in a way that shifted everything. Because the moment that figure entered, the hesitation ended, replaced by clarity, by direction, by authority that did not need to announce itself to be understood, and the guard in front of Vanessa straightened subtly, no longer uncertain, no longer waiting, but not moving toward her either. And that was when the truth began to surface, not fully revealed, not spoken aloud, but felt in the way the room changed its focus, in the way attention started to move away from Sophie's command and toward something else, something larger, something that had been present all along but hidden beneath assumptions. And for the first time since the moment began, it was no longer clear who actually held the power in that room. The shift was no longer subtle, it was undeniable, moving through the ballroom with a quiet authority that silenced even the most confident voices, because when real power entered a room, it did not need to announce itself. It simply redirected everything around it. And the figure who had stepped through the double doors carried that presence effortlessly, dressed in a tailored dark suit, his posture precise, his gaze sharp as it swept across the scene and landed, not on Sophie, not on Daniel, but on Vanessa. And in that single moment, the entire dynamic fractured, because the way he acknowledged her was not casual, not curious, but deliberate, respectful, and that was something no one in the room could ignore, least of all the security staff who immediately adjusted their stance, their hesitation replaced by a clear, unified response that no longer aligned with Sophie's command, and she felt it instantly, her confidence slipping further as she turned sharply toward the approaching man, her voice quick, trying to reclaim control before it disappeared completely. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," she said, her tone forced back into composure. But it did not land the same way anymore, not when the room itself had already begun to shift away from her, and Daniel stepped forward slightly, his expression tightening as he tried to read the situation, his eyes narrowing as he followed the line of attention now focused on Vanessa, confusion mixing with a growing sense of unease, because he recognized what was happening even if he could not yet explain it. The moment when someone he had underestimated was no longer operating within the boundaries he had assigned her, and that realization did not sit well with him. While Vanessa remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, as if this entire sequence had been unfolding exactly as expected, her gaze meeting the approaching man's for a brief second, a silent exchange passing between them that confirmed more than words ever could, and the guard who had been standing in front of her took a small step back, not retreating, but repositioning, as if acknowledging that his role in this moment had just been redefined. And that was when the room truly understood that something had shifted beyond their control, the quiet murmurs rising again, but this time not with judgment or amusement, but with uncertainty, with questions no one wanted to ask out loud, because the answers might reveal that they had all misread the situation from the beginning. And Sophie, refusing to accept that reality, turned back toward Vanessa, her voice sharper now, edged with frustration. "Who do you think you are?" she demanded. The question no longer rhetorical but desperate, because it was the only way she could hold on to what was slipping away. And for the first time, Vanessa did not remain completely still, her head tilting slightly as she regarded Sophie with a calm that felt almost detached. Not cold, not cruel, just certain, and when she spoke, her voice carried through the space without needing to rise, steady and controlled in a way that commanded attention without demanding it. "I think you already know," she said, and the words settled into the room like a final piece falling into place, because they were not meant to explain, they were meant to confirm. And as the man in the dark suit came to a stop just a few feet away, his presence now fully established, the last illusion of control dissolved, leaving only one question hanging in the air. Not about what would happen next, but about how far this reversal was going to go. The room held its breath without realizing it, the kind of silence that only forms when something irreversible is about to happen, and every person standing within those 5,000 square feet of polished marble and curated elegance could feel it pressing in, tightening the air, shifting the weight of the moment away from spectacle and into consequence. Because the man in the dark suit did not speak immediately. He did not rush. He did not acknowledge Sophie's demand or Daniel's presence. He simply stood there, his attention fixed on Vanessa with a level of respect that did not need explanation, and that alone said more than any introduction ever could, causing a ripple of recognition among the staff who straightened instinctively, their posture no longer neutral but aligned, unified under a command that had clearly come from somewhere far above the chaos unfolding at the center of the room. And Sophie felt it collapse beneath her feet, the invisible platform she had been standing on dissolving as she looked around, searching for validation that was no longer there, her voice attempting to regain authority but lacking the certainty it once carried. "I asked a question," she said, sharper now, almost brittle, as if repeating it could restore the balance she had already lost, but no one moved to support her, no one stepped forward, because the room had already begun to answer in its own way, through silence, through stillness, through the unmistakable shift of attention toward Vanessa. And Daniel finally stepped in, not out of defense, but out of confusion, his voice lower, controlled, but edged with something he could not hide. "What is going on?" he said, not to Vanessa, not to Sophie, but to the man who had just entered, as if he believed the answer would come from him, but it did not, because the answer had been standing in front of him the entire time, and he had chosen not to see it. And Vanessa, calm as ever, allowed the moment to stretch just long enough for that realization to begin forming, her gaze moving slowly across the room, taking in the faces that had judged, dismissed, and assumed, and then returning to Sophie, who now stood visibly unsettled, her earlier confidence replaced by a tight, controlled tension that betrayed the truth she was trying to ignore. And when Vanessa finally spoke again, her voice carried a different weight, not louder, but clearer, sharper, cutting through the uncertainty with precision. "You told them to remove me," she said, her tone even, almost conversational, but every word landed with intent. "And yet I am still here." And that simple statement did more than challenge Sophie. It exposed the reality everyone had been avoiding, that the command had failed, that the authority behind it had been overridden, and that meant something far greater was at play. And the man in the dark suit stepped forward just slightly, enough to position himself beside Vanessa rather than in front of her. A subtle but powerful distinction that did not go unnoticed. His voice calm, professional, but carrying a firmness that left no room for interpretation. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Vanessa directly, "do you wish for us to proceed?" And the room froze completely. Because in that single sentence the hierarchy had been revealed, not through explanation, but through action, through respect, through acknowledgement, and Sophie's composure cracked in a way she could not hide, her eyes widening just slightly as the implication settled in. Because for the first time since the moment began, she was no longer the one giving orders, she was the one waiting for them to be given. The question hung in the air like a final test, and for a brief second no one moved, no one spoke, because the entire room understood that whatever happened next would define everything that came before it. And Vanessa did not rush her answer. She did not react with emotion or anger or even satisfaction. Instead, she let the silence stretch just long enough for every person present to feel the weight of it, to feel the shift that had already taken place even if they did not yet fully understand it. And then she turned her head slightly, her gaze settling on Sophie, calm, steady, unshaken, and in that moment the difference between them became impossible to ignore, one grasping for control, the other holding it without effort. "Yes," Vanessa said quietly, her voice carrying across the room with absolute clarity, and the effect was immediate. The man beside her nodded once, precise and decisive, and without hesitation the security team moved, not toward Vanessa, but toward Sophie, their steps coordinated, professional, leaving no room for confusion or delay, and the shift was so sudden, so complete, that for a moment Sophie did not react at all, her expression frozen between disbelief and rejection, as if her mind refused to process what was happening. "Wait," she said, her voice breaking through the silence, no longer controlled, no longer confident. "There has to be some kind of mistake." But no one stopped, no one corrected it, because there was no mistake. The authority behind the action was too clear, too absolute, and the guards stopped just short of her, their posture firm but respectful, creating a boundary that did not need force to be understood. And Sophie stepped back instinctively, her eyes darting toward Daniel, searching for support, for intervention, for anything that would restore the version of reality she had been certain of just moments ago. But Daniel did not move, his expression no longer distant but stunned, his mind racing to reconcile what he was seeing with what he thought he knew, because nothing about this aligned with the narrative he had built. Nothing made sense unless he accepted something he had refused to consider, and that realization held him in place, silent, powerless in a way he had never experienced before, while the crowd, once so eager to judge, now watched in complete stillness, their earlier whispers replaced by a heavy, collective awareness that they had misread everything, that the roles they had assigned were never real to begin with. And Vanessa remained where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, as if none of this required effort, as if this outcome had been inevitable from the moment she walked in. And as Sophie was guided away from the center of the room, her voice fading into a mix of protest and disbelief, the final illusion shattered completely, leaving behind a silence that felt entirely different from before, no longer tense with anticipation, but filled with the undeniable truth of what had just happened, because the woman they had dismissed, the woman they had humiliated, had never been out of place. They simply had not known who she was. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was definitive, settling over the ballroom like a final verdict that no one could appeal. And as Sophie disappeared beyond the edge of the room, escorted with quiet efficiency, the attention did not follow her. It remained exactly where it had shifted, fixed on Vanessa, because now everyone understood that what they had witnessed was not a disruption, it was a correction, a reversal that had been waiting beneath the surface from the very beginning. And the crowd, once so quick to judge, now stood in a different kind of stillness, one filled with recalculation, with the subtle but unmistakable shift of people trying to realign themselves with power they had failed to recognize. Conversations did not resume, laughter did not return, because the atmosphere had changed too completely, too suddenly, and in the center of it all Vanessa remained composed, untouched by the chaos that had just unfolded, her presence steady, her expression calm, as if none of it required acknowledgement, as if the outcome had never been in question, and Daniel finally moved. The hesitation that had held him in place breaking as he stepped forward, his voice lower now, stripped of the certainty it once carried. "Vanessa," he said, her name unfamiliar on his tongue in a way it had never been before, and for a brief moment it seemed as though he might say more, might try to reclaim something, explain something, bridge the distance that had suddenly grown between them. But the words did not come, because there was nothing left that could undo what had just been revealed, and Vanessa turned to face him fully, her gaze steady, not cold, not emotional, simply clear, and that clarity was what unsettled him most, because it carried no trace of the woman he thought he had left behind, no hesitation, no attachment, only understanding. And in that moment he realized that whatever power he believed he had over her had never truly existed. It had only been allowed, and she had taken it back without effort, without announcement, without needing to prove anything at all. And around them the room began to shift again, but this time in a different way, guests adjusting their posture, their expressions, their proximity, subtle movements that signaled a new awareness, a new alignment, as if the entire environment was recalibrating around a truth it could no longer ignore, and Vanessa did not acknowledge it, did not engage with the attention or the sudden change in perception, because she did not need it. Her authority did not depend on their recognition. It existed independently of it, and that was what made it absolute. And after a brief pause she inclined her head slightly toward the man who had stood beside her, a silent acknowledgement that required no words, before stepping forward, moving past Daniel without hesitation, without pause, as if he were no longer part of the equation at all. And that was the final shift, the one that mattered most, because it was not about what had been taken from him, it was about what she no longer needed from him. And as she walked across the marble floor, the sound of her steps quiet but unmistakable, the room parted naturally, effortlessly, creating space without being asked, without being directed, because they understood now. And behind her the silence remained, heavy and undeniable, carrying a single truth that no one in that room would forget: that power does not announce itself, it reveals itself. And when it does, everything changes.